My daughter-in-law handed me a black apron in my own kitchen and whispered, "Try not to talk too much tonight, Eleanor. People don't need to know this used to be your house." She said it softly, with that polished little smile she saved for company, as if cruelty sounded kinder when it came wrapped in perfume and pearl earrings. I was 68 years old, standing beside the kitchen island my late husband Thomas had built with his own hands, holding a tray of deviled eggs I had made from the same recipe I'd used every Easter for 40 years. The house smelled of roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, and lemon cake cooling on the counter. Outside, cars were already lining the curb of our quiet street in Columbus, Ohio. Madison's friends were arriving for what she had called a small dinner gathering, though nothing Madison did was ever small. The dining room had been reset with my wedding china, my silver candlesticks, my crystal glasses, all arranged under the chandelier Thomas and I had saved 3 months to buy back in 1987. Yet somehow that evening I was the one being asked to disappear. Ryan, my only son, stood by the pantry with his phone in his hand. He had hurt her. I know he had because his eyes flicked up for half a second and then dropped back down to the screen. "Mom," he said quietly, not looking at me, "please don't make this awkward." That was the moment I understood how far things had gone. Not when Madison moved my framed photographs to the basement. Not when she started calling my living room her entertaining space. Not when she told the landscaper to pull out Thomas's rose bushes because they looked old-fashioned. No, it was this moment, with my son asking me to protect the feelings of the woman humiliating me in the house I still owned. Madison shook the apron once, impatiently, as if I were being slow. "The caterer canceled and honestly, you're so good at this kind of thing," she said. "Just stay near the kitchen, refill plates, clear glasses, that sort of thing. It'll make everything run smoothly." That sort of thing. As if I hadn't paid the mortgage. As if I hadn't scrubbed crayon off these walls when Ryan was 6. As if I hadn't sat beside Thomas in the front room during his last winter, reading the newspaper aloud because his eyes got tired too easily. My hands were steady when I took the apron from her. That surprised me. I expected trembling. I expected tears. Instead, I felt a strange quiet settle over me. Cold and clear, like the first morning frost on the back lawn. Madison turned toward the hallway, already satisfied that I had obeyed. Ryan exhaled, relieved that no scene had been made. I looked down at the apron. Black cotton. Cheap stitching. A little white tag still hanging from the neck strap. She had bought it for me. Not borrowed one. Not found one in a drawer. Bought it. Somewhere in some store aisle, Madison had pictured me wearing it while serving her guests in my own home. I folded it carefully once, then again, smoothing the corners with my palm. I laid it on the counter beside the cake and picked up the tray of deviled eggs. When the doorbell rang, Madison called out brightly, "They're here." Her voice floated through my hallway like she belonged there more than I did. I carried the tray into the dining room, where strangers admired my furniture, my curtains, my mother's old sideboard, and Madison accepted their compliments like each piece had come from her own life. "Your home is gorgeous," one woman said. Madison smiled. "Thank you. We've worked so hard on it." I stood 3 feet away holding the tray, while Ryan stared into his glass of iced tea. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said my name. And I, Eleanor Whitaker, widow of Thomas Whitaker, owner of every beam and brick around us, smiled like an old woman who had finally learned when silence was more powerful than begging. Madison thought she had made me invisible. What she didn't know was that 2 hours before she handed me that apron, I had already called my lawyer. The call to Helen Carter had lasted less than 7 minutes, but it had been the first honest conversation I had heard in months. Before that evening, I had spent so long pretending things were normal that I almost forgot what normal felt like. After Thomas passed, the house had become too large in a way I could not explain to anyone who had never lost a husband after 43 years of marriage. The stairs sounded different. The refrigerator hummed too loudly at night. His recliner sat in the front room facing the television, angled slightly toward the window because he liked to watch the mail truck come by at 3 in the afternoon. For weeks, I left his reading glasses on the side table. I left his flannel jacket hanging by the back door. I even kept buying the orange marmalade he liked, though I had never cared for it myself. Grief makes you do strange little things, not because they make sense, but because stopping them feels like losing the person all over again. Ryan came by every Sunday at first. He would stand in the kitchen, uncomfortable in his own childhood home, asking if I needed anything while checking messages from work. He was 40 years old then, tall like his father, with the same brown hair that curled slightly over his forehead when he needed a haircut. I wanted to believe he came because he missed Thomas too. I wanted to believe he still saw me as his mother, not as a problem waiting to be managed. Madison came with him one rainy afternoon in April, carrying a casserole from an expensive grocery store, and wearing a cream raincoat that looked untouched by weather. She hugged me tightly and said, "Eleanor, you should not be alone in this house." I remember how those words warmed me. I had been so lonely that even concern from Madison felt like sunlight through a closed curtain. She stood in my kitchen looking around slowly, not with comfort but with assessment. At the time I mistook it for care. "Ryan and I have been talking," she said. "Maybe we could stay here for a while. Just until you feel steady again." Ryan nodded beside her. "It makes sense, Mom. The house has plenty of room. Madison can help you with meals, appointments, all of that." I looked at my son, then at the hallway where his school pictures still hung in crooked frames. The thought of hearing family voices in the house again made my chest ache with hope. I said yes before I thought about what yes would cost me. The first week was almost sweet. Madison cooked chicken noodle soup and arranged fresh tulips on the dining room table. She told neighbors she was making sure I was not isolated. She called me Mom in front of Ryan, and every time she did he looked relieved. I told myself we were healing. I told myself Thomas would be grateful that I was not spending my evenings alone. Then the changes began so quietly I barely noticed them. Madison moved the coffee maker to the other side of the counter because she said the kitchen flowed better that way. She replaced the curtains in the breakfast nook because mine looked faded. She packed away the ceramic rooster Thomas had bought me on a road trip through Kentucky, laughing as she said it was charming but a little dated. One afternoon, I came downstairs and found my wedding portrait missing from the living room wall. In its place was a large framed print of abstract blue shapes that Madison said made the room feel more modern. I found the portrait later in the basement, leaning against a box of Christmas ornaments, wrapped in an old bath towel. I stood there for a long time, touching Thomas's face through the glass, telling myself not to be dramatic. It was only a picture. It was only a curtain. It was only a coffee maker. That is how people like Madison work. They do not take everything at once. They take one small piece of your life, wait until you apologize for noticing, then take another. By the end of the first month, Madison no longer asked before changing things. She announced. That was the difference. At breakfast one morning, while I was buttering toast at the kitchen island, she walked in carrying a leather planner and a cup of coffee from the expensive machine she had ordered without mentioning it to me. "Eleanor, Ryan and I were thinking the upstairs layout does not really make sense anymore," she said, as if discussing the weather. I looked up from the toast. "What do you mean?" She opened the planner to a page covered in neat blue ink. "The primary bedroom is huge, and you are only one person. Ryan and I are squeezed into the guest room, and with his work schedule, he needs proper rest. I think it would be healthier if you moved into the smaller room near the laundry area. It is quieter down there." The butter knife stopped in my hand. The primary bedroom was not just a room. It was where Thomas and I had slept for nearly 4 decades. It was where he had kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for the hardware store he managed on 5th Avenue. It was where I had folded his sweaters, prayed through his illness, and listened to the sound of his breathing on the nights I was afraid to sleep. Madison did not see any of that. She saw square footage. Ryan came in halfway through the conversation, already dressed for work, knotting his tie. "Mom," he said gently, too gently, "Madison is just trying to make things better for everyone. Better for everyone." That phrase became the soft blanket they threw over every selfish decision. The next Saturday, 2 movers arrived at 9 in the morning. Madison called them helpers. They carried my dresser, my sewing basket, my framed photographs, and the cedar chest Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary down the hall like I was being quietly relocated in my own life. I followed behind them with a stack of folded nightgowns in my arms, feeling foolish for wanting to ask permission to keep my own things. The smaller room had one narrow window that faced the side fence and the neighbor's trash bins. The laundry room door sat 4 feet away, and every time the dryer ran, the wall hummed. Madison had placed a pale gray comforter on the bed, and a little artificial plant on the nightstand. See, she said brightly. Cozy. I smiled because I did not know what else to do. For the first time since Thomas died, I shut a bedroom door and felt like a guest. After that, Madison's voice changed. Not enough for strangers to notice, but enough for me to hear it. She stopped saying, "Could you help me?" and started saying, "I need you to handle this." She stopped asking what I wanted for dinner and started leaving ingredients on the counter. She told the dry cleaner Ryan's shirts were under Madison Whitaker household. She told the mailman to leave packages by her front door. Her front door. The same front door Thomas painted red because I had seen one like it in a magazine and loved it. Her friends came over on weekday afternoons, women with shiny hair and loud bracelets, carrying iced coffees and opinions. They praised the house. They praised Madison's taste. They praised the way she had brought life back into the place. I would be in the kitchen rinsing fruit or loading the dishwasher, listening as Madison accepted every compliment with a little laugh. "It needed a woman's touch," she said once. I almost dropped a glass into the sink. A woman's touch. As if my hands had not polished that dining table every Thanksgiving. As if I had not painted the nursery yellow before Ryan was born. As if the house had been sleeping for 40 years, waiting for Madison to wake it. Ryan saw pieces of it, I think. Sometimes his eyes would linger on me when Madison spoke over me. Sometimes he opened his mouth as if he might say something. But then Madison would touch his arm or sigh, or tilt her head in that wounded way she had perfected, and my son would disappear back into silence. That hurt more than her words. Madison was taking my home, but Ryan was handing her the keys, one quiet surrender at a time. The first list appeared on the refrigerator on a Tuesday morning in May. I remember that because Tuesday had always been laundry day when Thomas was alive. He used to joke that the whole house smelled like warm cotton by noon, and he would come home from work, press his face into a stack of clean towels and say, "Ellie, you make even chores feel like home." That morning I walked into the kitchen expecting quiet. Instead, I found a sheet of white printer paper taped beside the calendar, held in place with one of my old Ohio State magnets. At the top, in Madison's neat handwriting, were the words, "Mom's daily tasks." For a moment, I simply stood there and looked at it. Laundry, kitchen counters, guest bathroom, lunch for the kids by 12:30, dinner started by 5, dishwasher emptied before guests arrive. My name was not written anywhere, but it did not need to be. The paper was for me. The house I had cared for since I was 27 years old now had instructions posted on the refrigerator like I was a hired woman who needed supervision. I heard Madison's heels clicking down the hallway before I could pull the paper off. "Oh good, you saw it," she said, tying the belt of her cream robe as if she were walking through a hotel suite. "I thought a routine would help everyone." I turned slowly. "Everyone." She smiled. "You know what I mean. With Ryan working long hours and me handling the social calendar, things have been slipping. Things." She meant crumbs on the counter after her book club. Wine glasses left in the den after her friends stayed until 10 at night. Ryan's socks beside the laundry basket because he had apparently forgotten how to put them inside it. "I have kept this house running for 40 years, I said quietly. Madison's smile thinned. "Of course. But you are older now, Eleanor. A written list keeps expectations clear." Expectations. That word sat in the air between us. Not gratitude. Not family. Expectations. I looked at the list again, and something inside me sank lower than anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger burns hot. This was colder. This was the feeling of realizing someone had studied your kindness and decided it could be organized into free labor. At first, I followed the list because old habits are hard to break. I wiped counters. I folded towels. I packed little lunches for my grandchildren, Lily and Parker, though Madison often complained that I used too much mayonnaise or sliced the apples too thick. I told myself I was doing it for the children, not for her. Lily was 8, gentle and observant, always watching the adults before deciding whether a room was safe. Parker was 6 and full of questions. One afternoon, he pointed to the refrigerator and asked, "Grandma, why do you have chores like me?" Madison laughed from the breakfast nook before I could answer. "Because Grandma gets confused when things are not written down," she said. She said it lightly, sweetly, like a joke. Parker giggled because he thought he was supposed to. Lily did not laugh. She looked at me, then at the floor. I rinsed a plate under warm water and felt my face become very still. There are humiliations that make noise, and there are humiliations that enter quietly and take a seat at your table. That one sat with me all afternoon. Later that week, I forgot the guest bathroom. I did not really forget. I had been at the pharmacy picking up my blood pressure medication, then stopped at the cemetery to leave fresh carnations for Thomas. When I returned, Madison was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. "Eleanor, I had Marissa coming over today," she said. The bathroom was not done. I looked past her at the hallway mirror, at my silver hair flattened by the spring wind, at the pharmacy bag in my hand. I had errands. "We all have errands," she replied. "But when people live together, they contribute." I almost laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because the words were so perfectly upside down. I had contributed the roof over her head, the dishes in her cabinets, the dining table where she entertained people who did not know my name. But I said nothing. That night, after everyone went upstairs, I stood in the blue glow of the refrigerator light and took the list down. The tape peeled slowly, making a soft tearing sound. I folded the paper once, then again, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk beside Thomas's old fountain pen. I did not throw it away. Something told me I might need it later. The next morning a new list appeared, printed this time, cleaner and colder than the first. Madison had added checkboxes. The printed list changed something in the air of the house. Once a thing is typed, it stops looking like a misunderstanding and starts looking like policy. Madison knew that. She placed the new list on the refrigerator every Monday morning, smooth and straight, with my tasks divided by room and time. Kitchen by 9. Laundry by 11. Guest towels before company. Dinner prep by 4:30. She never signed her name, because women like Madison prefer clean hands even when they are holding the pen. I began saving every list in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not know exactly why at first. I only knew that throwing them away felt like helping her erase what she was doing. The worst evening came near the end of June, when Madison hosted a dinner for Ryan's clients and several couples from her charity committee. She called it casual, but by noon she had ordered 2 floral arrangements, rearranged the dining room twice, and sent Ryan to pick up wine from a shop across town. I had been making lemon bars since 9 in the morning because Madison said store-bought dessert looked lazy. She stood in the kitchen wearing a navy dress and checking her reflection in the microwave door, while I sliced cucumbers for the salad. "Eleanor, tonight needs to go smoothly," she said. "These people matter to Ryan's future." I kept slicing. "Then Ryan should probably be the one worried about it." Her eyes lifted, sharp for half a second before the smile returned. "Of course. I just mean everyone should do their part." Everyone. That word again. By 6:30, the house was filled with voices. I could hear laughter from the living room, the clink of ice in glasses, the soft music Madison had chosen playing through the speakers Thomas installed years ago. I carried trays back and forth from the kitchen, setting down stuffed mushrooms, cheese plates, little glasses of chilled soup Madison had seen in a magazine and decided we needed to serve. Nobody asked if I wanted to sit. Nobody asked if I had eaten. I was standing near the sideboard with a pitcher of iced tea when a woman with silver blonde hair and a kind face turned to me. "You must be Ryan's mother," she said. Before I could answer, Madison appeared beside me so quickly it felt rehearsed. She laughed and touched the woman's arm. "Oh, Eleanor helps us around the house. She is practically family." The room did not go silent. That would have been kinder. Instead, conversation kept moving, soft and careless, while those words settled over me like dust. Practically family. Not family. Not mother. Not owner. Not the woman whose husband had built the shelves in the den, whose savings had paid for the floors beneath their shoes, whose hands had planted the hydrangeas blooming outside the dining room window. Practically family. I looked at Ryan. He had heard it. He was standing near the fireplace, holding a glass he had not taken a sip from. His face changed just enough for me to see the shame cross it, but not enough for him to do anything useful with it. He looked away. That was his answer. The woman who had spoken to me looked uncomfortable, but Madison was already guiding her toward the table, explaining the menu as though she had cooked every bite herself. I stood there with the iced tea pitcher in my hand until my fingers began to ache around the handle. Then Lily came in quietly from the hallway. She was supposed to be upstairs, but she had heard something. Children hear more than adults think they do. She came to my side and whispered, "Grandma, why did she say that?" I looked down at her small face, at the worry in her eyes, and I realized Madison had not only been teaching me my place. She had been teaching my grandchildren how to see me. That was the part one could not forgive. I set the pitcher on the sideboard, walked into the kitchen, and took off the apron Madison had insisted I wear for serving. This one was white with tiny blue stripes, prettier than the black one she would hand me later, but it meant the same thing. I folded it slowly and placed it beside the sink. In the reflection of the dark kitchen window, I saw myself clearly. Silver hair. Tired eyes. Straight back. I did not look like a servant. I looked like a woman who had been quiet long enough. That night, after the guests left and Madison went upstairs glowing from compliments that did not belong to her, I opened my desk drawer and placed the white apron on top of the saved lists. Then I took out Helen Carter's business card from the envelope where I kept Thomas's old documents. I had not called her in nearly a year. My finger hovered over the number only a moment. When she answered, her voice was warm and steady. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" I looked toward the hallway, toward the house that still carried Thomas's name in every corner, and said, "Helen, I think someone is trying to take my home while pretending to help me live in it." Helen arrived the next morning at 10 o'clock sharp, driving the same dark green Buick she had driven when Thomas was alive. I watched from the front window as she parked at the curb, stepped carefully onto the sidewalk, and looked up at the house with an expression that made my throat tighten. Some people enter a grieving home as if they are afraid to disturb the dust. Helen entered mine like a woman who remembered what it was supposed to be. She was 71, with short white hair, red reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and the calm authority of someone who had spent 40 years watching families become honest only when money was involved. Madison was at a Pilates class. Ryan was at the office. For the first time in weeks, the kitchen was quiet enough for truth. I made coffee, real coffee from the old drip machine Madison had pushed into the pantry, and Helen sat at the kitchen table where Thomas used to do crossword puzzles every Sunday morning. She did not rush me. That was her gift. She let me place the printed lists in front of her one by one. She let me unfold the white apron. She let me explain the bedroom, the credit card charges I had begun to notice, the way Madison introduced me at dinner, the way Ryan heard everything and folded himself into silence. Helen listened without interrupting, but her jaw tightened when she read the words Mom's daily tasks. "Eleanor," she said finally, setting the paper down with care, "does Madison believe this house belongs to Ryan?" I looked at my hands. "She talks like it does. Ryan does not correct her." Helen opened the leather folder she had brought and removed a copy of Thomas's estate documents. I recognized his signature immediately, strong and slanted, the way it had looked on birthday cards and tax forms and little notes he left beside the coffee pot. Seeing it there almost broke me. Helen placed one finger on the page. "Thomas left the house entirely to you. Not half. Not temporary use. Entirely. Ryan has no ownership unless you choose to give it to him." I nodded slowly, but hearing it spoken aloud felt different from knowing it in the vague way I had known it before. "He was very specific," Helen continued. "He also added a protection clause 3 months before he passed. If any family member or spouse of a family member pressures you, manipulates you, attempts to remove you from the property, or uses your assets without permission, you may revoke any voluntary financial support immediately and revise inheritance provisions without challenge from them." I stared at her. "Thomas did that?" Helen's eyes softened. "He worried you would be too kind when you were alone." For a moment the kitchen blurred. I looked toward the back door where his jacket used to hang and felt both loved and unbearably sad. Even near the end, when breathing tired him and walking to the mailbox took effort, Thomas had been thinking ahead for me. Helen reached across the table and touched my wrist. "There is more. You mentioned credit card charges." I brought out the statements I had printed the night before. Madison had been using the authorized user card I gave Ryan for household emergencies. At least that was what I thought it was for. Helen read through the pages with a yellow highlighter in her hand. Custom drapes. floral arrangements, dining chairs, wine shop purchases, a designer mirror for the entryway, catering deposits, boutique clothing listed under a store Madison loved. The total over 9 months came to $28,460. The number sat between us like a cold dish no one wanted to touch. I had paid for my own erasure. I had paid for the parties where she pretended to own my home. I had paid for the mirror she checked before sending me to serve guests. Helen removed her glasses and said very quietly, "Eleanor, you do not have to argue with her. You do not have to convince Ryan. You only need to take back the authority you never lost." I folded my hands on the table. They were older hands now, lined and spotted, but they had signed mortgage papers, held a newborn son, buried a husband, and kept a home alive through every hard season. "What do I do first?" I asked. Helen smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, but with the satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting for me to ask the right question. "First," she said, "we stop paying for Madison's version of your life." For the first time since Ryan and Madison moved in, I stopped cleaning out of guilt and started collecting out of purpose. Helen did not tell me to fight loudly. She told me to document quietly. So I did. That afternoon after she left, I made a cup of tea and sat at Thomas's old desk in the small room Madison had pushed me into. The dryer hummed on the other side of the wall. A basket of Ryan's shirts sat by the door, waiting for hands that were no longer willing to serve without seeing clearly. I opened a fresh folder and wrote one word across the tab, home. Then I placed the printed task lists inside, followed by the credit card statements, copies of Madison's text messages, and photographs of the white apron folded in my drawer. It felt strange at first, saving my own humiliation like receipts. But Helen's voice stayed with me. "You are not being petty, Eleanor. You are creating a record." The next morning I drove myself to the bank on High Street. It was only 11 miles, but it felt farther because I had not gone anywhere alone without explaining myself in months. Madison liked to know where I was. She said it was for safety. Really, it was for control. At the bank, I removed Ryan as an authorized user from the household account. I canceled the card Madison had been using. I changed my online passwords, ordered new checks, and opened a separate account Madison did not know existed. The young banker asked if I was sure 3 times. I looked at him over my reading glasses and said, "I have never been more sure of anything this year." After that, I went to the county recorder's office. I requested certified copies of the deed, the property tax records, and the transfer documents Thomas had signed. The clerk, a woman about my granddaughter's age, printed everything and slid the papers under the glass. My name was there in black ink. Eleanor May Whitaker. Sole owner. Not Madison. Not Ryan. Me. I sat in my car afterward with the folder on my lap and cried for exactly 2 minutes. Not because I was weak, but because I had spent months feeling like a guest in a house that the law, my husband, and my own life all said was mine. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove home. Madison was in the kitchen when I arrived, scrolling through her phone while a grocery delivery sat unpacked on the counter. "Where were you?" she asked without looking up. "Running errands," I said. She sighed. "Next time, can you let me know? I had to bring in all those bags myself." I looked at the bags. Then I looked at her smooth, annoyed face. "I am glad you managed." Her eyes lifted. For a second she did not know what to do with my tone. It was not rude. It was not apologetic. It was simply closed. That became my new language. Closed doors. Closed accounts. Closed access. Over the next week, I moved my important papers to Helen's office. I asked a locksmith to inspect the exterior doors, telling Madison it was routine maintenance. I scheduled an appraisal of the house and had the report mailed directly to Helen. I printed the doorbell camera history showing delivery after delivery of items Madison purchased with my card. I even asked Mrs. Alvarez next door to write down what she had told Helen, that Madison had been telling neighbors Ryan and she had inherited the house and were just letting me stay because I had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Alvarez cried when she handed me the note. "Eleanor, I knew that did not sound right," she said. "Thomas loved you too much for that." I placed her statement in the folder too. Every paper made me steadier. Every receipt returned a piece of myself. Madison noticed the change before Ryan did. Men like my son can ignore a room-changing temperature if no one tells them to put on a sweater. Madison could not. She watched me at breakfast when I no longer jumped up to refill her coffee. She frowned when her card declined at the boutique downtown. She asked why the grocery account no longer showed the premium delivery subscription, and I said, I decided we could shop like regular people. Her smile became thinner each day. Then, on Friday morning, she announced another dinner. Bigger this time. Ryan's clients, 2 couples from the charity board, and a local real estate developer she had been trying to impress. Everything has to be perfect, she said, standing in the doorway of my small room. No misunderstandings this time. In her hand was a shopping bag from a kitchen supply store. I saw the black cotton inside before she pulled it out. I almost laughed. Not loudly. Just inside my chest, where something that had been sleeping finally opened its eyes. Madison thought the apron would put me in my place. She did not know I had already decided where everyone belonged. By 6 o'clock that evening, Madison had transformed my dining room into a showroom for a life she had not earned. White roses stood in tall glass vases on the table. Place cards rested beside folded napkins. The silver candlesticks were polished, the same ones Thomas and I had bought on our 25th anniversary trip to Charleston. Madison moved through the room in a pale blue dress, touching forks, adjusting chairs, smiling at her own reflection in the window as dusk settled over the front yard. I watched from the kitchen doorway with the black apron folded over one arm. She had handed it to me that morning like a warning. I had accepted it like evidence. Ryan came downstairs at 6:15, nervous and quiet in a navy suit. "Mom," he said, glancing toward the apron then toward Madison. "Let us just get through tonight, okay?" I looked at him for a long moment. This was the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them fancy flowers. This was the man who now asked his mother to survive her own humiliation so his wife would not be inconvenienced. "That is exactly what I intend to do," I said. He did not hear the difference. By 7 the guests had arrived. Madison floated from group to group, laughing too brightly, touching Ryan's sleeve every time she wanted him to agree with her. The real estate developer, a tall man named Grant Miller, admired the crown molding in the hallway. "This place has beautiful bones," he said. Madison's eyes lit up. "That is what I keep telling Ryan. Once we open the kitchen wall and convert the old sewing room into a wine lounge, it will finally feel like ours." The old sewing room. My sewing room. The place where I had made Ryan's Halloween costumes, shortened Thomas's work pants, and sat alone after the funeral because the smell of fabric and cedar calmed me. I was standing near the sideboard with a tray of lemon bars when she said it. I did not move. I did not blink. Ryan gave a small laugh, the kind people use when they want to escape a moment without taking responsibility for it. "Madison has a lot of ideas," he said. "Good ones," she added, squeezing his arm. "This house needs a future." That was when I set the tray down. Not loudly. Not dramatically, just enough that the small silver tongs touched the china plate with a clean little sound. Several people turned. Madison's smile froze for half a second. "Eleanor, could you bring out the coffee?" she asked. Her voice was still sweet, but her eyes were not. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, walked to the small desk in the hallway, and picked up the folder Helen had prepared for me that afternoon. It was not thick. Truth does not always require many pages. Sometimes it only needs the right ones. I returned to the dining room and stood at the head of the table, in the spot where Thomas used to carve the turkey every Thanksgiving. Madison's cheeks tightened. "Eleanor, now is not really the time." I smiled gently. "Actually, Madison, I believe this is the perfect time." Ryan straightened. "Mom, what are you doing?" I opened the folder and placed the first document on the table. "Before anyone discusses remodeling my home, I think we should clarify who owns it." The room went still then. Truly still. Even the ice in someone's glass seemed to stop shifting. Madison let out a small laugh. "Eleanor, do not be embarrassing. Everyone knows this is a family home." "Yes," I said. "And I am the family member who owns it." I placed the certified deed beside the first page. Eleanor May Whitaker, sole owner. Then the property tax records. Then the estate clause Thomas had signed. Then the credit card statements, highlighted in yellow. Madison's face changed slowly, Like a curtain being drawn away from a window. First confusion, then irritation, then fear dressed up as offense. You went through our finances, she snapped. No, I said. I went through mine. Grant Miller quietly set down his glass. One of Madison's charity friends looked at the black apron still folded on the kitchen counter, then back at me. She understood enough. Ryan stepped toward the table, pale and restless. Mom, we can talk about this privately. We could have, I said. When your wife moved my wedding portrait to the basement. When she put chore lists on my refrigerator. When she introduced me as help in my own home. When she spent $28,460 from my account while telling people I was living here out of charity. Madison opened her mouth, but no sound came out cleanly. That is not fair, she finally said. I was improving the house. You were decorating a throne, I replied, and mistaking my silence for permission. I took one final envelope from the folder and placed it in front of Ryan. My hand did not shake. Helen Carter will deliver the formal copy on Monday, but I wanted you both to hear it from me first. You have 30 days to find another place to live. Madison stared at the envelope like it had insulted her. Ryan looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in months. There was panic in his eyes, and something softer underneath it, but softness that arrives only after consequences is not the same as love. I stepped back from the table. The house around me felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had finally stopped asking it to protect me quietly. Madison had wanted an evening her guests would remember. I gave her one. Madison did not cry until the guests were gone. That was important to notice. While they stood awkwardly in the foyer, gathering purses and coats, she kept her chin lifted and her smile pressed tightly into place, as if dignity could be performed long enough to become real. Ryan walked people to the door without looking at anyone for more than a second. Grant Miller shook my hand before leaving and said, very quietly, Mrs. Whitaker, I am sorry. I thanked him because my mother raised me to be polite, even on evenings when politeness felt like sweeping glass under a rug. When the last car pulled away from the curb, the house became terribly quiet. Madison turned on me in the dining room, surrounded by white roses and half-empty glasses. You humiliated me, she said. I looked at the table, at the china plates she had used like stage props, at the candlesticks Thomas once wrapped in newspaper so carefully when we moved into this house. No, I said. I corrected you in front of the same people you misled. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. Mom, 30 days is extreme. Where are we supposed to go? There it was. Not I am sorry. Not how did I let this happen. Not you deserved better from me. Just a question about his own comfort, dressed up as panic. I folded the deed copies back into the folder. That is the first household problem I will not be solving for you. Madison gave a sharp little laugh. You are really going to throw out your own son? I am asking two capable adults to live in a house they pay for, with furniture they bought, using money that belongs to them. Her face flushed. Everything I did was for this family. I looked at the black apron lying on the kitchen counter. Then this family has confused service with love. Ryan sat down heavily at the table. For a moment he looked young again, not 40 but 10 years old, waiting for me to soften first. I had softened first my entire life. I softened when he forgot birthdays. I softened when Madison made jokes about my age. I softened when my bedroom was taken, when my photographs were hidden, when my name disappeared from my own rooms. Softness, I had learned, becomes dangerous when people build their comfort on it. The next 30 days were not loud. That almost surprised me. I expected arguments, but Madison preferred punishment through silence. She moved through the house with tight shoulders and locked drawers. Ryan tried to talk to me twice, both times beginning with, Madison feels, and both times I stopped him. Tell me what you feel, Ryan, I said. He never had a full answer. Helen handled the formal notice. The canceled card remained canceled. Madison's premium deliveries stopped arriving. The grocery lists got shorter because suddenly everyone understood what things cost. Lily hugged me the morning they packed the upstairs bedroom. Parker asked if I would still be his grandma after they moved. I knelt carefully in front of him and held his small hands. Always, I said. No house changes that. On the final day, Madison stood in the foyer beside a stack of boxes. staring at the red front door like it had betrayed her personally. She did not apologize. People like Madison rarely apologize when they lose control. They call it misunderstanding, jealousy, unfairness, anything except consequence. Ryan paused before stepping outside. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. "I should have said something sooner." I nodded. "Yes, you should have." He waited, maybe hoping I would rescue him from that truth. I did not. After their car left, I stood in the doorway until the taillights turned the corner. The house behind me was still messy. There were dents in the walls from moved furniture, dust outlines where Madison's mirrors had hung, and a faint smell of cardboard in the hallway. But it was quiet. Not empty. Mine. That afternoon, Helen came over with a locksmith, and by sunset every exterior lock had been changed. I carried my wedding portrait up from the basement myself. It was heavier than I remembered, but I managed. I hung it back in the living room, right where the abstract blueprint had been. Thomas looked out from the frame with that steady half-smile, and for the first time in months, I did not feel foolish speaking to him. "We are home," I whispered. The next morning I made coffee in the old drip machine and sat at the kitchen table as sunlight moved across the floor. No list waited on the refrigerator. No apron hung over a chair. No voice called from the hallway telling me what needed to be done. I drank my coffee slowly, listening to the soft hum of the house settling around me. Madison had treated me like help because she forgot one simple thing. Help can leave. Owners can change the locks.